a very fascinating mimer and has a great history. So I'll give you the story behind it all, and I'm going to add a little bit in terms of the some of the information that I've read about the time. It comes from a book called, what was it, 15 billion vodka bottles to the moon or something like that. So I'll tell you a little bit about that book and why it's called that very interesting name. So 1953, of course, Stalin was the premier of the USSR. And beginning in 1952, and maybe even a little bit prior to that, there started a development in Russia that basically began a process of attempting to move the Jewish people to Azerbaijan. They actually created a Yiddish state out there, and you can go there nowadays and you can still see Yiddish signs on the signposts and everything like that. But basically what Stalin wanted to do is he wanted to get the Jews all into one area, and that would make it easier for him to do away with the Jewish people. So this was a huge really a plot, and it ended up being called the Doctor's Plot. And the reason why it was called the Doctor's Plot is that there were several Jewish doctors who were accused of poisoning several major figures in the government, and the media began writing articles specifically written by some people who were just viciously anti-Semitic, and it was a whole, the entire country was being stirred up against the Jewish people, and the situation was really bad. So this book, 15 billion vodka bottles to the moon, I might have gotten the number wrong because I lent the book to somebody many years ago and never got it back, as typical of any good book when you lend it to people. It was written by a Soviet scientist by the name of Yosef Shklovsky. And Shklovsky was an astrophysicist. He was a premier scientist. He was on the top level of his field. And as a result of that, the Soviets really hadn't decided to get rid of him, or weren't willing to get rid of him that quickly, even though he was not exactly your standard communist. He wasn't a full-out dissident. He considered himself just a scientist, and he didn't like the Soviet rule. But in general, except for a little hijinks that he played here and there, he in general he stayed within the generous bounds that the Soviets gave him. So this book was titled 15 billion vodka bottles to the moon because one day he decided to calculate the amount of vodka that Russians consume every year in those days, in the 50s, and probably more nowadays. It came out to something like 15 billion vodka bottles. And then he calculated based on the size of the vodka bottle that actually, if each vodka bottle was stacked one on top of the other, that many vodka bottles would reach the moon. And he said, to my mind, this is a greater accomplishment than Sputnik and all that kind of stuff. The fact that the Russians plow through that much vodka every single year. So it was a guy with a very good sense of humor. It's a funny book. It's an interesting read about what it's like, of course, being a Soviet scientist. And it was published after he died, from his notes and stories that he told to fellow scientists. But he talks about the Doctor's Plot, and he talks about it from a very personal perspective. So during this time, like I said, things were getting very scary for Soviet Jews. People were getting picked up off the streets, and professionals who consider themselves not religious, they were getting arrested, and they were disappearing into the prison system. So for him, it was particularly scary. Not only were his friends getting tossed and disappearing, but he didn't know when he himself was going to be the next guy picked up and sent away. So it was a very, very scary time. Immediately prior to this time, he had been working on a research into the Crab Nebula. And the exact parameters of the research, to be honest, are beyond me. Maybe some of you are astrophysicists and you can explain what was going on. But for some reason, the radio emissions that were coming from the Crab Nebula were not exactly matching up with what they expected. And this was a big, big question at the time, trying to figure it out. And he spent several years trying to figure out the answers to this question. And he was going nowhere. And around this time in January 1953, he stopped doing this research because, first of all, he wasn't getting anywhere. Second of all, the fear that they were surrounded by was just so intense that he writes in the book, he says, I was in no mood for science. You just didn't have the head to be able to put into it. So comes March 1953, he describes this as follows. He says he was getting on the tram, it's packed with people, and he picked up a newspaper to see what's going on. And of course, as many of you know, the newspaper in Russia is called Pravda, which means truth, and everybody knows is the exact opposite of truth. But in any case, Stalin had died several days before, and he heard the rumors that Stalin had died on Purim. But nobody knew what was going to happen with the whole situation, whether people are going to, whether Khrushchev, who came up next, was going to be continuing these policies, Stalin's policies with regards to the doctor's plot. So the fear had not disappeared quite yet, because nobody knew what was going to happen. And he's flipping through the newspaper in the tram. He says the place is absolutely crushed with people. And he sees a small little box on the bottom of the page, which says, oh, by the way, the entire doctor's plot was completely false. Anybody who survived prison is being sent home and rehabilitated. And he describes this, he writes in the book, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, he writes something like, I was hit by a wave of joy. He describes it, he says, every single cell in my body was singing with happiness. And it just, this incredible, incredible joy just totally engulfs him. And out of nowhere, an answer to the question regarding the Crab Nebula comes to his head. And he thinks, oh my gosh, it's a great way to approach it. He pulls out a notebook and starts scribbling equations, and he realizes that all these equations are matching up. This makes sense. And the next stop, he jumps out of the tram, runs home, grabs a notebook and starts writing down this process. And he says he was able to write down this conclusion to this problem that has been irking scientists for many, many years. And he submitted it as is to the Academy of Sciences, the Soviet Academy of Sciences, and it was accepted and published as is with no changes. And he writes, he says that I think was basically the highest point of my decades in in science was finding this, learning this or figure out this conundrum. So I find fascinating about the story is, of course, the personal reflection in it. But besides that, there's an idea in Hasidic thought that joy has the ability to be able to break through problems. That when we create problems, we're oftentimes creating them from ourselves with our negative attitude. And when a person allows themselves to access pure joy, they're able to transcend, to supersede the system of intellect and go down into the source of intellect. And that's exactly what he did. Years of research was not able to get him to the point where he needed to be able to get to. It was specifically joy that allowed him to be able to access the deepest element of his intellect and to be able to bring it out onto paper and to solve this problem. So that's fascinating because I find that a not a case of a chassid who is talking about this idea that's described in Hasidic thought, but the idea of a scientist who doesn't actually know Hasidic thought at all. He was, just a scientist. He was not religious in the standard form of things. He certainly had a religious soul. Later, one of his fellow scientists passed away, and he felt an urge, a need. The very famous scientist, I'm forgetting who he was, but to do something for him, he went to shul and said Kaddish for this guy. So he obviously had some kind of spiritual drive inside himself, but it certainly wasn't an observant Jew. So for that element, especially in the month of Adar, which is the month of joy, it's an important thing to remember that with joy we can access greater capabilities than we ever knew that were possible. So that's anecdote number one. Anecdote number two, and this is directly related to this mimer. So this is Purim, 1953. So this was an extensive farbrengen, and again, the Rebbe had been Rebbe at this point for just 2 years, just a little bit over 2 years. And typically in a farbrengen, you had one mimer in each farbrengen. There's some farbrengens you had, but it's not common at all. You had two mimarim. This mimer was a second mimer. First mimer was your standard mimer, and the Rebbe went through many ideas in this farbrengen. And then at some point, the Rebbe told them to sing the song Kol Bayar. Kol Bayar is a song that is sung in several languages. It's been translated even into English. Father in the Forest, and it basically tells the story. It was written by the Shpoler Zayda, was a colleague and close friend of the Alter Rebbe's. And he says in this song, and it's a dialogue between a father and a child, and the child is crying out in the forest. Basically, I want to get back to my father, but I can't. And there's a back and forth. The father tells him how to get back, and he goes back and forth. And the ending of the song, interestingly enough, is that the guards are standing at the door, and I can't get through. And then there's the chorus. It's that's this chorus. So I remember in yeshiva, when this song was discussed, the question is like, okay, how are we ending the song? I've gotten all the way to the palace, and I would like to see my father, but there are guards at the door. How do I get past? How could that be the ending of the story? And the answer was, that's not the ending. The ending is the and that gets faster and faster and faster. So the message is that joy allows us to get past the guards. Joy allows us to be able to break down the barriers, to be able to get back to godliness, even after we've strayed, even after we've gotten lost in the forest, we disappeared. So the Rebbe told them to sing the song, and then afterwards, the Rebbe became extremely, extremely serious, and a very, very, people describe it there as there was a unique look on the Rebbe's face. And the Rebbe told the following cryptic story. He said, during the Russian Revolution, there was a brief period of time where there were elections, and the Rebbe Rashab sent messengers to his Hasidim that they should be involved with the elections. And this was important because, of course, at the time the Jews were living in shtetls, and they were very much, if you want to put it, reclusive. But the question was, should we be involved with these kinds of things? Especially when you're talking about two figures that are going into or vying for a position. Oftentimes the question was, who's going to be worse than the other? What's good for the Jews is not just sometimes what's actually good for the Jews, but basically which one is, which is the lesser evil. And so the question, people had a legitimate question whether or not they should be involved with these elections. And the Rebbe Shab sent out messages that the Chassidim should be involved and should go out and vote. So he had one of these Chassidim who was absolutely somebody who's not involved with this physical world. He just, he's told that, the Rebbe wants you to go vote. So, the Rebbe tells us to go do something. So he goes, he puts on his Shabbos clothes, he puts on his gartel, and he goes to the voting booth. And he gets to the voting booth, and one of his friends tells him who to vote for or whatever it is. And as he's voting, of course, there are people who are cheering for their candidates in the area, and they're cheering. And the Russian cheer for hooray is hurrah, hurrah. So what does the chassid hear? He hears the two words in Hebrew, hu ra. He is evil. And so this chassid responds by cheering with these guys, hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. And the Rebbe said it 3 times, and the Chassidim who were there realized that something's going on. And the Chassidim repeated after the Rebbe, with a tremendous amount of energy, hoorah, 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 he is evil. And then the Rebbe began this mimer. Everybody knew that something had happened. Nobody had any doubt whatsoever. Nobody had any idea what had happened. But 3 days later, the news came out of Russia that Stalin had either suffered a stroke or been poisoned. Nobody knows exactly what happened. There are conspiracy theories that he was killed by one of his or some of his advisors. Nobody knows the details, but he died on Purim. This mimer is known among Chassidim as the mimer that killed Stalin. And in fact, when the Rebbe edited it, they put a little notice, on the bottom, and the Rebbe let it through. And the little notice on the bottom says that this mimer apparently was connected with the things that occurred at the same time with regards to the downfall of the leader of Russia at that time. And the Rebbe let that go through. He did not take it out, deny it. He didn't confirm it. He let that little paragraph go through. And what I find is interesting is, and this I'm not 100% sure about. I need to do a little bit more research to be able to see. But based on my little research, it seems like this is the only mimer that deals directly with, that the Rebbe said, that deals directly with Haman. Most mimarim are dealing with other things. This one seems to deal directly with Haman. And so it seems to me, and again, I need to do a little bit of research, but at least just in terms of the beginning of this conversation, it seems to me that the Rebbe used Chassidus to deal with the Haman of his time. So that's a little bit of an intro to the whole subject. So, of course, getting into Purim itself, the question that we're going to ask is a really, really important question. The pasuk says, "Al ken karu layamim ha'ela Purim al shem ha'pur." Therefore, they called these days Purim because of the lots, because of the lot. Of course, review a little bit of the Purim story. Haman is very upset at the Jewish people in general, and then he's very, particularly upset about Mordechai. Mordechai deals with later, but at first, in terms of getting rid of the Jewish people, he throws lots, he throws dice to be able to decide when he's going to kill the Jewish people. And therefore, the holiday is referred to Purim because of these lots that Purim threw. Now, that's very, very, very strange for 2 reasons, and this is the questions that we're going to ask right now. But when you think about it, just for a moment, the whole throwing lots thing is a complete side aspect of the story. It really, really does not seem to have any intrinsic value with regards to the full story and what's going on. There are so many other things. We could call this, we call it Tanit Esther. We call that the Fast of Esther. So we should call this Sudat Esther. Sudat Esther Mordechai. We can call it, Chag Shushan. There are so many different things that we can call this holiday. Purim, lots. What's going on? But not only is it a side aspect of the story, it's the mechanism, as we're going to describe, through which Haman used to destroy the Jewish people. So it seems to be the ultimate of irony that we name the holiday. It's like calling a holiday that Hitler died, calling it Gas Chamber Day. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. It's a very, very, very sorry. It's a vicious comparison, but that's the question that we're going to see over here. So the pasuk, of course, in the Megillah says, "Therefore they call these days Purim because of lots." The name by which something is called denotes its content. And it is therefore understood from this verse that Purim's central theme is signified by the idea of the lottery. But at first glance, this is very strange. The lot was not only not a central part of the miracle, it was in fact a major part of the decree. It was the mechanism used to destroy the Jewish people. The Rebbe was very into names. Before he became Rebbe, when he went to Paris to pick up his mother from after she had escaped from the Soviet Union, this is in 1947, I think, 48, somewhere around there. He farbrained with the Hasidim, and this became, an epic, well-known farbrain. Among other things, he went around the table, and everybody who was there, they told him his name, their name, they introduced themselves to him, and every single person, he explained how their names reflect on their personal journey. So obviously, this is quite remarkable and quite shocking because he didn't know these people personally, but he went around the table and explained to them what their names signify. And this is something that the Rebbe was taught by his father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchok. Rabbi Levi Yitzchok was very, very, very much into names. He was a major Kabbalist, and he wrote the writings that we have. A lot of it deal with the specific aspects of the names of the Talmudic sage who said this, why, how the name is related, and the Rebbe would use that way of study in his own approach. In fact, somebody just came out with a book last year which goes through the Talmudic sages and how each one of the sages is explained and how many of the statements that they make are magnified by their name, and going back through the Rebbe's and the Rebbe's father's writings. 2 volumes of this. So names are very, very important. They signify the content, they signify the inner idea of by which a person functions. So another Rebbe says, well, in theory, we can going back to the Maimer. This can be explained by recalling the Talmudic teaching that Haman rejoiced when he saw the lot fall in the month that Moshe died, without knowing that Adar is also the month that Moshe was born. So the Gemara in the Megillah talks about what happened, why is it called Purim? And it says that when Haman threw the lots, he was trying to pick up, spiritually, whether he was going to be successful. And when he saw that they fell out in the month of Adar, he was very excited. Samach Simcha Gedola, he was very, very, very excited because he knew that Adar is the month that Moshe died. And I said, okay, if this is the month that Moshe died, then I'm certainly going to be successful. But what he did not know was that Moshe was also born in the month of Adar. So accordingly, the Rebbe continues and says, one can say that the miracle is that the lots fell during the month in which the savior of the Jewish people, Moshiach Shel Yisrael, Moshe, was born. And that's the miracle, and that's the reason why we call it Purim, because of the fact that the lottery specifically fell out during a time that is relevant to the idea of salvation. But the Rebbe says that's not enough. Since there's not quite sufficient. Seemingly, the name of the holiday references not only a successful lottery, a lottery in which the lots fell out in something that is good for us, but the lot itself, as the Megillah says, Pur, which is the lottery. Pur hu agoral. So the idea of Purim is not just the original lottery, but in general the concept of a lottery. And so this is because the idea of a lottery comes from a very high spiritual source, which is where the miracle itself extended from. The fact that this month is the one in which Moshe was born is only a result of the original antecedent, Purim, because of the lots. So the reason why it fell out in Adar, because it was a successful Purim, is because of the fact that the original source, the whole idea of a lottery, is a very powerful spiritual idea. So I hope that what you've seen in the Hasidic philosophy so far is this kind of building up one layer on top of the layer on top of the next layer. We're always reaching up higher or reaching down lower to see the systems that are in place. The fact that Haman threw a lot is not just something that was inside. He had something he wanted to accomplish. And we want to understand what he wanted to accomplish. And we want to understand why was he unsuccessful. In other words, if he was trying to reach a spiritual place which was very, very high, so what about it was unsuccessful? And that's really what we're going to see over here. But we remember that everything extends downwards, and we need to understand the system through which it went from one level to the next. On the ground level, you see, of course, the story of Purim. It is what it is. You can look at it on a very, very physical level and say, okay, this was a great story of politics. This is a story how Mordechai was able to use the queen in order to be able to advocate on behalf of the Jewish people. But that's not a reason why we celebrate the holiday. We celebrate the holiday because we recognize that it was a miracle. We recognize that it was not just a matter of advocacy. It was something much greater than advocacy. It was miracles that were, as we say, that were hidden. The word Esther comes from the concept of hiddenness, concealment. Where the Gemara says, where do we know that Esther is found in the Torah? And the verse that it quotes is, Vanochi Aster, Aster Panei Bayom Hahu, that I will hide my face on that day. So we recognize that the whole story is this concealment, and the whole point is to be able to dig into the concealment to be able to see what really is going on. So this mimer is going to reveal an aspect of Purim that is not typically looked at all. It's, again, Haman's spiritual outlook and where he failed to create a genocide based on that aspect, based on that outlook. And so it's a very, very exciting mimer. And like I said, I will possibly send out another copy of it through Rabbi Smith, on Monday or Tuesday or something like that, because I only got to chapter 8, and I believe there are 10 chapters here. But we will definitely, God willing, finish it before Purim, and it'll hopefully add some excitement to all of our Purim. 9 chapters. So I only missed the last chapter. Any questions? We good?
Good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful
Pleasure.
story.